The footage was paused at 11 hours 42 minutes and 56 seconds p.m. when I noticed the deer stop moving. I had been reviewing Camera 07, one of 32 trail cameras spread across a privately managed forest in western Pennsylvania. My job was simple on paper: collect memory cards, catalog clips, flag unusual wildlife activity, and deliver a weekly archive to the land manager. I had been doing that for 11 years. I knew what a deer looked like when it heard an owl, how raccoons triggered infrared sensors, and how rain could make a branch appear to move on its own. This clip was different for one reason. The buck was standing 6 feet from the camera, facing left. Its ears were forward. Its body was still. Then, between frame 1842 and frame 1843, it turned its head toward the lens. Not unusual by itself. What caught my attention was the background, 30 feet. Behind the deer, between two white pines, there was a vertical shape that hadn't been there in the previous frame. It looked roughly human in proportion, but the infrared image was too noisy to identify it. I advanced one frame at a time. The shape remained visible for exactly 4 frames. Then it was gone. There was no corresponding motion blur, no branch movement, and no animal crossing between the trees. The timestamp remained continuous. 11 hours, 42 minutes, and 56 seconds. p.m. No missing frames. I marked the clip for review and kept working. 10 minutes later, I found myself returning to it. If you've ever reviewed trail camera footage yourself, tell me in the comments whether you've seen something that looked impossible but eventually had an ordinary explanation. Because when I checked the camera's archive, that 4-frame appearance wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was the date attached to an older file. I kept reviewing. I started reviewing trail camera footage because I was good at noticing small changes. Before this job, I spent 4 years doing inventory work for a forestry company. Most of my days involved spreadsheets, equipment logs, and long drives between remote properties. When the company began installing wildlife cameras for habitat studies, somebody needed to sort the footage. I volunteered because I already understood the locations and didn't mind repetitive work. There is a rhythm to it. A typical card contains hundreds of clips, 90% or nothing, wind moving grass, shadows crossing a sensor, empty trails or animals appearing for 2 or 3 seconds. Deer are the most common. Raccoons trigger cameras constantly. Foxes pass through quickly. Bears can produce dozens of clips because they linger close to the sensor. Night footage is especially predictable. Infrared turns everything green or gray. Distance becomes difficult to judge. A spiderweb can fill half the frame. A moth can look enormous. Heat, fog, rain, and loose branches create false shapes all the time. After 11 years, I stopped reacting to unusual images immediately. My first question was always mechanical. Could the camera have malfunctioned? My second was environmental. Could weather, vegetation, or an animal explain it? Only after those failed did I consider anything else. Camera 07 was one of the older units, a Browning model mounted on a pine at chest height. It faced a narrow game trail beside a shallow creek. The camera had been installed in September 2014, replaced twice, and repositioned once, by about 9 feet. I knew that trail well. The landowner had told me deer used it most heavily in autumn. Nothing about the location was unusual. The trail was quiet, isolated, and familiar enough that I could recognize it without checking a map after midnight alone. The 2014 file was only 7 seconds long. A doe entered from the left at 11 hours 42 minutes and 31 seconds p.m. and stopped near the creek. At 11 hours, 42 minutes and 41 seconds. She lifted her head. 3 seconds later, the camera triggered again, producing a short burst of still images. I counted them manually. 24 frames. The first 23 showed the same trail, the same creek bank, and the same 2 white pines behind it. Frame 24 contained a dark vertical shape between those trees. I enlarged it. The shape was too far away for reliable identification, but its proportions were strangely consistent. The distance from the ground to the top of it measured roughly 6 feet in the image, After correcting for the camera angle, it was not standing directly on the trail. It appeared approximately 32 feet behind the camera's trigger zone. I checked the original metadata. No corrupted frames. No change in exposure. No battery warning. No time jump. No time jump. I also checked the camera's maintenance log. The unit had been installed 34 days earlier, and there was no recorded service that night. My first explanation was an animal standing upright. Black bears occasionally do that. Deer can rear. People sometimes walk properties without notifying whoever is reviewing the footage. So I searched the surrounding clips. At 11 hours 42 minutes and 44 seconds, the shape disappeared. At 11 hours 43 minutes and 9 seconds, a fox crossed the lower right corner. At 11 hours 44 minutes and 2 seconds, nothing moved. That should have ended it. Instead, I compared the apparent position of the shape with the trees. If it were an animal standing behind the pines, its body should have overlapped at least one branch as it shifted. It didn't. Across the 24 frames, its outline remained almost perfectly unchanged. I made a note: possible. Upright animal. Verify against vegetation. Then I noticed something else. That should have ended my concern that night. The second clip came from a camera 6 miles north, near an abandoned logging road. That unit was designated Camera 19. I had no reason to connect it to Camera 07. The terrain was different, the landowner was different, and the camera had been installed by another technician. Its archive contained ordinary footage from elk, deer, foxes, and the occasional black bear. The unusual clip was recorded on November 3, 2018. At 2 hours 16 minutes and 8 seconds, a large buck entered the frame and stood beside a fallen oak. 2 seconds later, the camera triggered again. The buck remained completely still. Behind it, near the road, was a pale, vertical mark. At first I assumed it was a birch trunk. Then the next frame showed the mark had shifted approximately 4 feet to the right. I checked the surrounding trees. There was no birch there. The shape appeared in 3 consecutive frames, then vanished. That was all. No obvious figure. No face. Nothing dramatic. The unit sometimes produced pale streaks when condensation formed over the infrared filter. So I pulled the maintenance report. The filter had been replaced 11 days before the clip. That made the explanation weaker. I measured the shape against the road. It appeared roughly 58 feet from the camera. The apparent height was close to 6 feet again. I printed the frame and placed it beside the 2014 image. The shapes were not identical, but both occupied the same narrow range of height. Both appeared behind an animal, and both disappeared without a visible transition. I still didn't think there was anything supernatural happening. I thought I had found 2 unrelated camera artifacts that happened to resemble each other. Then, I checked the dates. October 17, 2014. The third clip came from Camera 04, less than 2 miles from Camera 19. It was recorded on October 17, 2022. That date stopped me. I opened the file expecting another pale shape. Instead, I found a deer standing alone beside a narrow clearing. The clip began at 11 hours 41 minutes and 58 seconds p.m. The deer remained still for nearly 12 seconds. At 11 hours 42 minutes and 10 seconds, it suddenly turned toward the left edge of the frame. A vertical figure appeared behind it. This time, the image was clearer. The figure stood between 2 trees approximately 40 feet from the camera. It seemed to have arms hanging straight down. Its head was visible above the brush. I counted the frames. It appeared for 5 frames. Then, it was absent. The strange part was not the figure itself. It was the timing. Camera 04 was synchronized to within 3 seconds of the other units, because I had calibrated their clocks during an annual maintenance visit. The clip from 2022 occurred at 11:42 p.m., almost exactly the same minute as the 2014 appearance. I went back to the 2018 footage. That one occurred at 2:16 a.m., so it didn't fit. Then I checked the location. The 2014 camera had been positioned near a creek. The 2022 camera was also near a creek. The 2018 camera was beside an old logging road. I plotted the 3 points on a map. They formed an uneven triangle covering approximately 8 square miles. That was when I stopped calling them camera artifacts. I still wasn't ready to call them anything else. I wrote the 3 dates on a sheet of paper and calculated the intervals. 2014 to 2018, 4 years. 2018 to 2022, 4 years. The exact dates were different, but the recurrence interval was not. 4 years. That number was not meaningless. Mara had been maintaining wildlife cameras for 17 years. She was the person I called when a sensor misfired, when timestamps drifted, or when a camera produced an image that looked impossible. I sent her the 3 original files without telling her what I thought they showed. Her first response came 12 minutes later. Camera artifacts, she said. I expected that. Then she called again. There is one problem. She had checked the metadata and discovered that all 3 cameras used different firmware versions. The 2014 unit was running firmware 3.2. The 2018 unit used 4.7. The 2022 camera used 6.1. Different hardware generations. Different sensors. Different compression. That ruled out one common software glitch. Mara enlarged the figures herself. She noticed something I had missed. Each figure appeared approximately 2 frames after an animal stopped moving. Not when the animal entered. Not when it left. After it became still. She checked 12 other clips containing stationary deer from the same cameras. None showed anything similar. Then she measured the figures against known objects. The 2014 shape was estimated at 5.8 feet. The 2018 shape was 6.1. The 2022 shape was 5.9. That was too consistent for 3 random reflections. At least statistically. Mara still refused to call it a person. She suggested a simpler possibility, an optical artifact caused by the camera's infrared emitters interacting with moisture and vegetation at particular angles. There was one way to test it. Find another camera positioned near the same line of sight. I searched the archive for cameras within 100 yards of the 3 original locations. Only one had overlapping coverage. Camera 12. It had been installed in 2010 and removed in 2016. Mara told me to pull everything from its final year. I opened the archive. The first file, 2014. Camera 12 had captured the creek from approximately 70 yards east of camera 07. That meant I could compare the same area from another angle. The footage lasted 6 seconds. A doe crossed the trail at 11 hours 42 minutes, and 51 seconds p.m. at 11 hours 42 minutes and 57 seconds. The animal stopped. Between 2 frames. Something appeared behind it. The figure was partially hidden by a tree. But from this angle, I could see that the tree was in front of it. That mattered. The shape wasn't a reflection on the lens. It was occupying physical space in the scene. I checked the original image dimensions and calculated the approximate distance using the known width of the trail. The figure stood roughly 46 feet from camera 12. That placed it almost exactly where the 2014 figure appeared from camera 07. Same night, same minute, different cameras. I searched the installation logs. Camera 12 had been mounted at 3:14 p.m. on September 9, 2014. Camera 07 had been installed at 10:21 a.m. the same day. Neither technician had reported seeing a person in the area. Then I searched older footage. Camera 12 had records from 2010 through 2016. I started with October 17th. There were files for 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, and 2015. In 2011, nothing unusual appeared. In 2012, nothing. In 2013, the camera had been offline that entire week. In 2014, there it was. I widened the search. The earliest matching image wasn't from 2014. It was from October 17th, 2006. That camera wasn't installed until 2010. The image belonged to an older archive system maintained by the County Wildlife Office. The file had been scanned from a film-based camera trap photograph. I stared at the date for several minutes. October 17th, 2006. The photograph showed a deer beside the creek. The figure stood in the same place. The handwritten time on the 2006 photograph was 11:43 p.m., 1 minute later than the digital cameras. That should have been meaningless, because film cameras were not synchronized to anything. But the location was exact. The county archive included an old survey map showing where the camera trap had been placed. I compared the tree line in the photograph with modern satellite imagery and field notes. The two white pines were still standing, although one had grown several inches thicker. I began to form the first theory I was willing to say aloud. Maybe the thing wasn't moving through the forest. Maybe the cameras were repeatedly capturing something that remained in one location, while the surrounding animals changed. That would explain why the figure always appeared near deer and why its apparent position stayed fixed. But it created a larger problem. If the figure was physically present at that location, someone should have seen it during 11 years of maintenance visits. I checked the service logs. 37 visits had been recorded between 2014 and 2025. None mentioned a person. None mentioned unusual tracks. None mentioned an obstruction between the two pines. Then I examined the images more carefully. The figure did not appear every 4 years. It appeared on October 17th in 2006, 2014, and 2022. That was an 8-year interval. The 2018 image was from November 3rd and came from a different location. It wasn't part of the same sequence. I had forced it into the pattern because I wanted the pattern to be larger than it was. That realization should have made me feel better. Instead, it made the original sequence more precise. October 17th. Every 8 years. Same creek. Same trees. Same approximate position. Then I noticed another detail. That detail made the pattern harder to dismiss. The trail was ordinary in every measurable way. The creek was approximately 12 feet wide. I measured the two white pines. The first was 41 inches around. The second was 36. Between them was a narrow opening approximately 22 inches wide. I placed a marker on the ground and photographed the scene. Nothing looked unusual. There were no footprints, no broken branches. Then I found something under the leaves. A metal trail, camera, mounting bracket. It was badly rusted and stamped with the number 04. Camera 04 had never been reported missing. According to the equipment log, it had been replaced normally in 2022. I carried the bracket back to the truck and photographed it. The serial number was partially visible. I searched the equipment database. It belonged to a camera retired in 2006. That was the same year as the oldest photograph. I called Mara. She told me to bring the bracket to the office. Before leaving, I mounted the spare camera and programmed it for 1 image every minute, plus motion-triggered bursts. The setting was intentionally conservative. I wanted to see the environment without relying on the camera's usual trigger behavior. At 8:02 a.m. I left. At 8:19 a.m., my phone showed the first upload. The camera had triggered. That was impossible. The forest was empty when I left. I opened the image. It was daylight. The creek was visible. The two pines stood exactly where they always had. And between them, near the 22-inch opening, was a person-shaped shadow. There was no person standing there. The shadow was simply darker than everything around it. I checked the next frame. The shadow was gone. But something else had appeared in the metadata. The camera had recorded the image at 11 hours 42 minutes and 58 seconds p.m., 8 hours before the camera was powered on. I waited until daylight before approaching the access trail. The camera, however, had rotated approximately 11 degrees from its original position. No branch had fallen against it. There were no signs of tampering. At the far edge stood a narrow shape partially hidden by a tree. I could not identify it. What I could identify was the tree. It was the same white pine visible behind the figure in the 2006 photograph. That was impossible because the camera was facing in the opposite direction. The 2006 photograph, the 2014 camera 07 frame, the 2014 camera 12 frame, the 2022 camera 04 frame, the 2025 frame. The final image showed that opening from behind. The geometry matched. But there was one unresolved detail. In the older images, the figure was always approximately 30 to 46 feet away. In the final image, the figure appeared 11 feet from the camera. That meant either the figure had moved closer over time, or the camera had somehow captured the same position from a different angle. I checked the camera's internal accelerometer. The rotation occurred between 11 hours 43 minutes and 1 second and 11 hours 43 minutes and 2 seconds. 1 second. No gradual movement. Just 11 degrees. I reviewed the final image at full resolution. Near the bottom right corner was a small, pale rectangle. It looked like a trail camera identification label. I zoomed in. The label was unreadable, but I could make out 4 digits. 2006. I have not returned to that creek since. The camera was retired. The bracket is still in my office. Mara refuses to discuss the photographs. As for the archive, I kept everything. There is only one thing I cannot explain. The final image was recorded by a camera whose infrared system was disabled, yet the figure's eyes were reflecting light, and the camera was facing away from the moon.